Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. I'm speaking with Brandon Movall about his exhibition, Embracing Our Shadows. Brandon, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Can you tell us the inspiration for this particular body of work?
Absolutely. So I created this long-form 50-piece project over the span of 2020, which, as all of us know, was during the pandemic.
The what?
The pandemic. Who would have thought of that? And so I was looking for ways to exercise my creativity while being, kind of in a stressed out state like everybody was.
Sure.
And luckily, photography at night outside by yourself is the perfect activity to do so. And so when I was going out and trying to photograph different areas, as a civil engineer by day, I was really interested, like all of my work, with understanding and injecting different types of artistic values into the infrastructure that we see all around us. And so when it came to trying to identify what this long-form project was going to be about, I decided to make it about what I was feeling in that moment, which was a lot of anxiety, depression, worry about the world in general, what things were going to be going. But I didn't want to make it super dark, super depressing, or anything like that. And so I decided to balance out the shadowiness of the concept with, bright lights, very colorful infrastructure. And so the way that I decided to frame it out as, a photograph is to use myself as a model and insert my own shadow into the images. And so the basic concept is, we all live with some kind of darknesses, whether that's mental health struggles, family struggles, friends, whatever, jobs, et cetera, et cetera. It's different for everybody, but we all have some kind of common core darkness that we see in our lives that we try to hide away from the world. And from doing this project, I've kind of discovered that by embracing those shadows, which is where I came up with the name, we're able to kind of lean into becoming our best versions of ourselves, being able to embrace ourselves entirely for what we are. And so all the shadows and all the images are slightly different. All the locations are different and things like that as well, to help showcase the variety of darknesses that people experience. But the unifying factor that kind of connects us all is common humanity.
Dynamite. All of the images are done at night, which, as I understand it, is your MO, your neck of the woods. You are a night photographer by self-identification. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And how did you arrive at night photography?
Yeah, definitely. It's a very weird niche place to be, and I understand that. So like I said, I am a civil engineer by trade. So I help design local infrastructure all around the Twin Cities. And so I started doing photography in college as a way to de-stress from engineering in school. Sure. I was originally involved in my college's, marching band and pep band, so I was able to balance that engineeringness with the artisticness of band. And when band was done, I was looking for a different creative outlet to kind of go with. And so during the day, I'd have class, I would be studying and things like that. And so nighttime was the only time I was available to do any types of artistic thing. And so that's how it kind of started. And then when I moved up to the Twin Cities after I graduated, obviously I was working 40 plus hours during the week, during the day. And so again, nighttime was my only time to go out and photograph. And I really was drawn to it. I find it quite calming to go out at nights. And I find it especially challenging to kind of find interesting things under such a limited scope of availability to take photographs.
Fascinating. Necessity drove you to finding your niche.
Exactly.
And it's quite challenging to photograph at night, yes?
Definitely.
I mean, I've found it, and I'm not much a photographer, but it's pretty tough. Do you find that aspect, the challenging aspect of taking photographs at night, appealing, or less so?
It depends on the day, and it depends on what I'm trying to go for. Most of the time, I find it stress relieving to go out and kind of experiment and create and see what I can pull out of such a restrictive environment, as you kind of put it. When I have an idea for something in my head and I go out and try to shoot it and it doesn't turn out the way I want it to, it can get frustrating. But I think letting go of expectations of what you want it to be and kind of letting the art dictate itself back to you, as opposed to trying to capture what you want to see, kind of let the moments and the surroundings and the infrastructure and the shadows in this particular project kind of let that take the lead, and then I just trying to document that kind of magic that comes out of it.
Interesting. Going into a shoot, do you have a preconceived notion, or do you envision how you'd like the shot to end up, or do you discover them as you go?
Good question. It depends on the project usually. Most of the time, what I do is I just get in my car and I drive. I just drive around. I don't really have a specific location in mind.
Sure.
I'm just trying to explore the Twin Cities at night, which luckily for me, the Twin Cities is awesome at night. Like super colorful, lots of areas to explore, very interesting dynamics of things. And so most of the time it's just me driving around until something catches my eye.
Okay.
And then I go, oh, there's something over there. Let me pull a U-turn real quick and park somewhere nearby, and then walk on down and see if I can figure out what exactly caught my eye about this location and kind of frame it up from there.
So very little pre-scouting. It's really all in the moment?
Correct. It's very much emotion driven, as opposed to me trying to say, oh, there's this building over here that lights up this color at night. I'm going to go shoot that one night type of thing. At least for this project, that was the way that happened.
Does it ever happen where you're driving around in an area during the day and you're like, I bet this is interesting at night, and go back and see if it's true?
Sometimes, absolutely. Sometimes it works out really well, and sometimes you're like, oh, that doesn't look the way I thought it would at night. It's just such a wide range. I've often had it, just because downtown's such a fresh haven of light and color at night. I drive down there a lot at night, and I had friends who recently moved downtown, and I went down there during the day, and I was like, everything's very brown and like glass and blue, and like this is very different than what I expected to be. So it just kind of depends on the way it is. But for this project specifically, most of it was led through either me saying, I'm just going to drive around and see what comes to me, or towards the end, I was trying to get a good balance of colors throughout it. So towards the end of me feeling like the product was wrapping up, I was trying to look for specific colors of things to shoot. So I was, I still need a green type of photograph or something like that. And some of those either came from either pre-scouting or knowing that something turns green at specific times. For example, there's one at Allianz Field, which is where Minnesota United plays. And I know that's typically a blue stadium, but I was hoping, and I was correct, that on St. Patrick's Day, it would turn green. And it did. So that was an example of how kind of, not necessarily pre-scouting, but having the knowledge base beforehand of, my local community and stuff really paid off in the end.
Sure. And coloristically, they tend to be emphasizing one particular hue, for many of them. And what drove that choice?
I think a lot of my work is very monochromatic in nature. I think it tends to give a more moody vibe to it if it's specifically one color. I found that type of photography, when I've, found other photographers that I'm a fan of their work, it tends to shift more in that direction. And so I kind of wanted to play with, especially knowing that this was going to be a longer, bigger project, if I could take each individual image as being one color, but then when you zoom out, you're able to see the whole color scale and spectrum, which is kind of the way that it was framed up for the exhibition itself.
Is it important to you to discover those colors in their local, actual, literal state, like the green of Allianz Field for St. Patrick's Day, or do you sometimes use white light or fluorescent light, and then in Photoshop, in post-production of the image, do you manipulate it?
Right, so no, I don't use nearly any manipulation, just a little bit of color tweaking here and there, but not, it's white, I'm gonna make it all red, or it's blue, I'm gonna make it slightly green or something like that. It's more just, let's make it a little more vibrant, let's tweak the color ever so slightly to get the vibe I want. But I feel it's much more important and challenging to find those colors actually out in the real world. Plus, I'm a self-taught photographer, so I don't know much about Photoshop. Like, I physically don't know if I could actually even do that. And so being able to find that out in the real world And I think that also, when people come to see the photos as well, you know, they can say, oh, like, I kind of know where that is, or,
Right.
oh, that's what that looks like, you know, when you actually take a photograph of it, as opposed to just driving by it at, you know, 60 miles an hour or something like that instead.
Also driven by necessity.
Exactly.
I mean, there's the limitations of your technological understanding of those programs.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fascinating. In addition to being night photography, and you identify as a night photographer, these are all urban images, correct? And so are you also an urban photographer, or is it just for this project that it's urban?
It was just for this project. I have done some more night landscapes, things like that, in a more, you know, rural setting, or, you know, parks, trees, that type of things. The reason I did it for this is because I knew that the shadow had to be the focus of it, and being able to find that much light in a rural area is much more difficult to do. And so just the way that the core thought process behind the project began really drove, again, like you said, the necessity of having it be in an urban location.
How did you arrive at the shadow painting? The whole idea of using the shadow, did it arrive to you in a lightning bolt strike, or the muse whispering in your ear, or was it a chance discovery that then you built off of?
Yeah, I think it was a sequence of events and then kind of a lightning bolt at the end. So a previous project that I'd had on display in Minneapolis involved light painting, which is where you take, sometimes, in my case for the project, I took a stationary photo of, you know, a very dark room with a hardwood floor, and then use basically a flashlight with different colors attached to it to literally paint in a long exposure photograph where it made an abstract image of light. And I was really drawn to that, and it was very successful, and I was very happy that I did it. And so for this one, I wanted to kind of do the opposite, to see if I could do something that was similar in scope and kind of in my artistic kind of grain, but different than things I had done before. I didn't want to just present the same type of ideas moving forward. And so I'd kind of played around with it a little bit, and the first image that's hanging up above my name and the image stuff was the first one that I took for the project. And once I captured that and saw it, I was like, yes, this is going to work. This is the basis of the project.
Proof of concept.
Exactly.
Yeah. And given that there wasn't a model or a formula to go about, whereas light painting is a thing, right?
Exactly.
Is dark painting a thing as well, or?
Not that I've really found.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a common concept in photography to use some kind of well-known thing, such as a human body or something, for a scale and point of, like, a focal point of an image. And being a night photographer, you don't get a whole lot of ability to do that, just because, you know, the painting's already so dark, the photograph's already so dark.
Yeah.
Having a person included in it is also just dark. And so trying to incorporate common values of photography, such as using a human for scale, adding some kind of humanity into a portrait so it's not as, you know, sparse and just infrastructure based. And then trying to not necessarily invent a new thing, but kind of play on existing techniques but make something new was kind of the emphasis behind shadow painting, as I like to call it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Does that use of the figure for scale dovetail with your civil engineering background as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Speaking of different experiences and maybe overlapping or influencing each other, you spoke of having being in the band.
Yes.
And as a musician, do you find there are elements of music that influence your photography, or are they really two separate practices for you?
I think for me, they're more both just ways to scratch an itch. Is
Okay.
the way I like to see it, as a way to kind of keep both sides of my brain in balance. You know,
Yeah.
engineering is so heavy on, you know, the math side of things, the design side of things, the engineering of very, very important systems for our daily life.
Yeah.
And I think having some kind of outlet for my other side, just because you're not allowed to be super creative within the engineering world
Sure.
as one would like to be if they're a little more creative. I would say they're separate things in my mind, but they're both used for the same purpose.
Forgive me for saying this, but I think you're wrong.
Really?
I mean,
awesome.
Well, and I'm being facetious a bit, but you were very intentional about composing the visual organization of the installation, and the organization of each image really reminds me of both musical rhythm, but also musical notation. They almost read as individual notes of a larger composition, of a song,
Yeah.
so to speak. So in that way, I feel aspects of music through sight.
I never thought of that before. I think it's awesome that people are able to draw different conclusions and things like that from the work. But I think that's a really interesting insight. I've never thought about that before.
So I'm not totally wrong.
I guess not.
All of the photographs are printed on metal.
Correct.
Can you tell us what drove that medium choice?
Absolutely. So being a night photographer, I've had a lot of, not issues, but a lot of frustrations with trying to showcase my work outside of social media. Just because when you print things that are black with things that are colored, everything just gets really murky and very kind of dumbed down and diluted a little bit. It just kind of looks very meh, is the way I like to describe it. And so I had played around with a few different ways to print things, and I had a different gallery director recommend printing on aluminum. So basically it's an inkjet print that's hot pressed into a plate of aluminum and then sealed over the top of it. And what that does, and the reason I like doing it specifically, one is because it's a much more modern way to display artwork than a typical frame. I think it gives it a little bit of a differentiator. And two, when you look at the photographs, the blacks and the colors are still separated and create a much more vibrant image, which works really well for the type of work that I end up doing, so that it's not a very murky, muddy type of photograph. It's very clear, very kind of medium to high glossiness. There's a lot more impact you get from a metal print than printing it in a typical photograph way in a frame.
And when you say separated, the blacks separated from the color, is that physically, like there on a micro scale, there's actually depth to the layers of the printing process?
Yep.
They're all the same size. They're all very uniform.
Correct.
I think they're 9x12
Yes.
prints. What drove that unity in size?
Yeah, I think the end goal of how I wanted to display the artwork, especially since I knew of the Hopkins Center for the Arts space, I kind of knew what area I had to work with and what area I had to play with. And it's such a unique displaying area in aspects that we have a curved wall and a slanting floor. It's a very unique space for any artist to kind of exhibit in. And so my idea for how to exhibit it is, I think we talked about it the first day that we came in, as kind of a river of jewels, is the way I like to describe it. Of, when you first walk in and you see it, it's kind of this waving, flowing, individual things that make up a much larger, colorful composition. But it also invites you to come in and look closer at the ones that your eye is drawn to, because there's 50 pieces in this, which is an insane amount of artwork for an exhibition. You're not going to like everyone, and I get that. But the goal of the project, again, was to help people identify with those shadows or those darknesses that they like best, and they can have a much more intimate relationship with that photograph and get closer to it and investigate that on a more personal level. So in order to not distract from the actual images themselves, I wanted to create a uniform displaying experience.
A river of jewels.
River of jewels.
Yeah, it's dynamite. The embracing the shadows, how do you, and I have my ideas about this, but it's not about my ideas. How do you How do you feel the works visually communicate that act of embracing the dark side?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the way that photographers have always used humans in their photographs to bring a bit of warmth and life to them. I think if you looked at any of these images without the shadows in them, it'd be very fine. It'd be like, cool, there's a wall. Woo, like crazy, that's awesome. But again, by embracing that shadowy figure that's in it, the image is made more beautiful, more compelling, more enhanced. The same way that if we embrace our inner darknesses, we as humans become more complex, more thriving in our whole versions of ourselves instead of just the happy-go-lucky people we post on social media.
For sure. Where else might we see your work, Brandon?
It's a good question. So right now, I am being showcased in a gallery in Louisville. I'm also a member of Praxis Gallery in Minneapolis, which is Minnesota's only non-for-profit photo gallery, which I'm a very big fan of, providing non-for-profit galleries the opportunity to showcase work. Since I am a civil engineer, by day, like I make just fine money. I don't really do this for the money. I do it for the appreciation of the art and to get more people, as opposed who you aren't usually introduced to art, such as engineers and stuff like that, out into the arts community and kind of make us all a little more well-balanced in our individualness.
Sure. And do you have a web presence? Do you have a website?
Yes. So my website is bphotographymn, like Minnesota.com. You can also find me on Instagram, same handle, bphotographymn, and then on Facebook as well, facebook.com/bphotographymn. Very consistent.
Cool. And what's next for you?
What's next for me is a really good question. I'm really excited because I'm working on a new long-form project right now that dives much more into how the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was just passed, how that can really enhance our communities if we take full advantage of it, and challenging not only my fellow engineers, but also the general public to be more observant and aware about how infrastructure actually impacts our day-to-day lives, whether we think about it a lot or not.
Dynamite. Have you ever taken a photograph during the day?
I do. I started actually with just all kinds of photography, just doing it like on the weekends and stuff like that. But again, like the challenge and the peacefulness of night photography really drove me to having that kind of be my focus specifically, and then just timing-wise it worked out. But every year during the summer, when the sun doesn't set until 10 or 11 at night, which is when I go to bed, I try to do at least one, daytime sunset, afternoon type of photo, just to kind of say, hey, like I can still do this. It's still fun. Every once in a while, it's a nice little challenge to get back out into sunlight and be like, oh gosh, like I have to like think about shadows here now and things like that, which they're moving like all the time, and stuff like that. So I do it every once in a while, but I think for me, like the artistic challenge and creativity keeps me staying with night photography for the most part.
And you bring up a great point in the fluctuations of nighttime hours seasonally.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite season to work in relative to the length of working time you have?
Yep.
Or relative to how pleasant it is?
Both. So I have two favorite times, and they're at right around daylight savings time on each end, because especially in the fall, we fall back an hour, and it's warmer and darker earlier, which I really appreciate, because Minnesota winters, it's really hard to get motivated to get outside and take pictures. Same thing, in the spring, where it's still dark, around 7 or 8, but much more pleasant outside.
Sure.
I feel, night photography in the winter is fun because, snow and things like that adds a lot of different elements to it. But, and then in the summer, obviously, it's hard to get out late at night when everything's green and stuff. But those two peak areas on either side of winter and summer are absolutely my favorite time. And I definitely go out like most nights when that time's around.
Do you ever get up really early to catch the back end of night, or is it really always the evening side?
I usually do it in the evenings just because I am a morning person, but I dedicate that towards my job because I have flex time. So I go in earlier in the day so that I can come home early in my afternoon, do all the things that my wife needs me to do during the day. So at nights, then I can focus on being artistic.
Yeah. Do you shoot digitally or film?
So I shoot digitally.
Yeah.
My parents always had a Nikon growing up. That was their camera of choice, and they were very generous in gifting me a Nikon. So I use a very standard DSLR camera. I don't use anything super fancy, standard lens, standard D50-300 camera, like basic borderline, DSLR type camera. Because for me, it's much less about the equipment you use. Like, you don't need a super fancy camera to get really into photography. You don't need, the most expensive lens or things like that. Just if you have the creativity and the willingness and the passion to go make something for yourself, whether other people like it or not, as long as you appreciate, the art you're making, that's the most important thing. And you definitely don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, to get the best equipment.
Fantastic. Brandon, thank you so much for sharing your work with our community.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've really appreciated it.
I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager at Hopkins Center for the Arts. I've been speaking with Brandon Movall in support of his exhibition, Embracing Our Shadows, on view in the first floor lobby gallery at Hopkins Center for the Arts until September 10th, 2022.